It was a bright, peaceful morning at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington, Virginia. The air was still, heavy with reverence. Tourists stood quietly behind the ropes, hats removed, eyes fixed on the guard marching in perfect rhythm. Every step echoed with discipline and honor. Among the respectful crowd was one woman who didn't seem to belong in the silence. Karen, mid-40s, loud, impatient, and full of attitude. She rolled her eyes at the crowd's seriousness, muttering, under her breath, "It's just a grave, what's the big deal?" Her teenage son tried to hush her, but Karen wouldn't stop. She wanted pictures, lots of them. She shoved through people, complaining about how slow the ceremony is. When someone asked her to be quiet, she snapped back, "I paid taxes too. I can do what I want." Across the plaza, the tomb guard continued his slow, precise steps. His face never flinched, his posture flawless, his silence unbreakable. Every second he stood there represented sacrifice, discipline, and respect. But Karen didn't care. She leaned against the barrier, mocking his movements, even imitating his march with exaggerated steps. Some tourists gasped, others whispered. A man recording the ceremony quietly pointed his camera toward her. He sensed trouble coming. Karen laughed, saying loudly, "Look at him, so serious. Bet he's not even allowed to blink." Her voice cut through the sacred air like a knife. Parents covered their children's ears. The crowd grew tense. The guard, still expressionless, pivoted sharply, his boots striking the marble in a crisp echo. His discipline never wavered, but his presence suddenly felt heavier, stronger. Karen smirked, thinking he'd finally react. He didn't. He simply stood taller. The silence around him deepened, but Karen wasn't done. She crossed her arms, muttering, "What's he gonna do, stare me to death?" and took one bold step forward, right up to the rope. A quiet voice in the crowd whispered, "She better stop." But she didn't. And what happened next would shock everyone standing there. Karen stood with her arms folded, smirking at the tomb guard as if daring him to move. The air around her buzzed with uncomfortable silence. The other tourists, who moments ago were still and reverent, now whispered nervously. Everyone knew this wasn't just rude, it was deeply disrespectful. "Ma'am, please," said an elderly man beside her. "Show some respect. This place is sacred." Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, give me a break," she barked. "It's a free country, isn't it? I can stand wherever I want." The old man shook his head and turned away, muttering, "Some people just don't understand honor anymore." Meanwhile, the tomb guard kept marching, precise, mechanical, unwavering. His eyes never flicked toward her, not even for a second. He moved with the same deliberate grace as before. 21 steps. Turn. 21 steps back. The sound of his boots echoed across the marble, sharp and clean, slicing through the growing tension. Karen scoffed loudly. "Oh, come on, he's not even real, he's like a robot." She turned to her son. "Take a video. This'll go viral." Her son hesitated. "Mom, don't," he whispered. "You're embarrassing yourself." But Karen was already posing, leaning into the rope line, throwing mock salutes at the guard. The crowd murmured, phones slowly rising. Some were recording quietly, unwilling to look away from the unfolding drama. Then, for the first time, the guard's voice cut through the air. It was powerful, thunderous. "Ma'am, stand back. Do not cross the line." The command echoed like a gunshot. Karen froze for a moment, startled, then laughed it off. "Oh, so you can talk," she said mockingly. "I was starting to think you were just decoration." People gasped. A man near the front whispered, "She's gone too far," but Karen didn't stop. Fueled by pride and attention, she took a step closer. "I'm just trying to get a picture. You don't have to act like I'm some kind of threat." The guard didn't move. His voice remained steady, perfectly measured. "This is a restricted area. Respect the tomb." For a split second, the gravity of his words seemed to pierce through her arrogance. Her smile faltered. But then she rolled her eyes and waved him off. Relax, soldier boy. No one's touching your precious stone. A woman nearby gasped. That's not just a stone, she said sharply. That's where America's unknown soldiers are buried. Karen ignored her, posing again, hand on hip. Her son lowered his camera, shaking his head in shame. The crowd grew restless. Some shouted for her to step back. Others whispered prayers not for her, but for the peace she was disturbing. The guard resumed his march, face expressionless. His every movement radiated honor, a living symbol of discipline. But the contrast between his silence and her chaos made the scene unbearable to watch. Karen raised her voice once more, trying to reclaim attention. You think you're so special just because you wear a uniform? Guess what? You work for me. That line hit like a slap in the face to everyone present. A veteran in the crowd, holding a small flag, clenched his jaw. This is wrong, he whispered to his wife. She doesn't deserve to stand here. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. The plaza was suffocating with tension. Karen crossed her arms again, glaring at the guard, expecting a reaction. But he gave her nothing. No expression, no words. Just silent. Absolute control. That silence, more than any yell, made her angrier. What? You can't even look at me? You think you're better than me? She shouted, stepping forward again. Instantly, the guard's rifle snapped to his shoulder. The motion was fast, precise, controlled, not a threat but a warning. Stay back, do not approach the tomb. The sound of his voice made several people in the crowd step backward instinctively. But Karen, red-faced and trembling with embarrassment, barked, You can't tell me what to do. Every camera was now aimed at her. Her words were being captured, her face immortalized. Her son tugged her arm. Mom, please stop. Everyone's watching. She yanked her arm away. I don't care who's watching, she screamed. The guard resumed his stance. Still, silent. A living wall of dignity against the storm of her ego. Then came the line that sealed her fate, the one that would echo in every news clip that followed. Karen leaned in, pointing a finger at the guard, and sneered, Say something again, tough guy, I dare you. The guard didn't move. He didn't blink. And that's when Karen's anger reached a breaking point. Her next move, reckless, impulsive, and unforgivable, would turn this moment from an argument into a global outrage. The crowd had gone completely silent. You could almost hear hearts pounding. Karen's breathing grew heavier, shallow and angry, as she stood just a few feet from the tomb guard. He remained still, his chin lifted, eyes locked forward. He didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even acknowledge her presence. To him, she was nothing more than a disturbance in the wind. That quiet dignity. It infuriated her. Look at me when I'm talking to you, she snapped. But still, nothing. The sound of the wind brushed against the marble, rustling through the trees nearby. Somewhere a small child whispered to his father, Why is that lady yelling at the soldier? The father gently pulled him close and said softly, Because she doesn't understand what respect means. Karen's face twisted with frustration. Her voice cracked as she shouted, You think you're better than everyone? You're just standing there doing nothing. Her son was on the verge of tears. Mom, please, he begged. Let's just go. But pride, that toxic, blinding pride, had already taken over her. She took one more step forward, crossing the rope line. The entire crowd gasped. Several people shouted for her to stop. And then, in a moment of pure madness, she slapped him. A sharp, echoing crack cut through the air. Her hand had struck his face, with the face of a tomb guard, a soldier who represents every American who gave their life without a name. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Even the air seemed to freeze. The guard's head barely turned from the impact. Slowly, deliberately, he reset his posture, shoulders squared, rifle firm at his side. His eyes stared forward, unwavering, unbroken. He did not strike back. He did not speak. He simply stood, his ground, an immovable symbol of honor in the face of chaos. Then, after 3 long seconds, his voice thundered through the plaza. Ma'am, you are in violation of federal law. Step back immediately. His command echoed like a cannon. The force of it made Karen stumble backward in shock. Gasps erupted across the plaza. Some people began filming openly now. Others turned away, unable to believe what they'd just witnessed. The veteran who'd been watching earlier clenched his fists, tears welling in his eyes. "That man just took a slap for every soldier buried here," he said quietly. Karen's son, horrified, dropped his phone. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered. But Karen stood frozen, her confidence drained, her arrogance shattered. The guard's presence, his stillness, his control, it all pressed down on her like a mountain. Within seconds, 2 park officers rushed in from the edge of the plaza. Their boots pounded against the marble. "Step away from the guard," one shouted. Karen blinked rapidly, finally realizing the gravity of what she'd done. "Wait, I didn't mean, Ma'am, step back now," the officer repeated firmly. Her son tried to pull her away, but she resisted, stammering. He was being rude. I was just trying to..." But the officer cut her off. "You assaulted a United States service member while on duty. That's a federal offense." The crowd began to murmur, some angry, some in disbelief. The once peaceful plaza had turned into a scene of moral chaos. As the officers escorted her away, Karen's face turned pale. Every camera, every phone was pointed at her. Her actions, once meant for attention, had now made her infamous. The tomb guard, however, remained motionless, unshaken, unbroken. His cheek still red from the slap, but his posture perfect, rifle steady, chin high. One of the officers glanced toward him and nodded respectfully. The guard gave a subtle nod back, then resumed his measured march. 21 steps, turn, 21 steps back. The ritual continued, as if nothing had happened. That was the power of discipline, the kind that no insult or strike could break. As Karen was led away, the crowd parted silently. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was only a heavy, reflective stillness. A mother held her son close and whispered, "That's what honor looks like." The boy nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the guard. "He didn't even hit back," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "because real strength doesn't need to." The tomb guard continued his patrol, every movement precise, deliberate, eternal. The sun glinted off his uniform, and for a brief second it felt like even the fallen soldiers he guarded were standing with him. By now, the video of the slap had already begun spreading online. Within hours, it would go viral. Millions of people across the world watching in disbelief. The headlines would read, "Tourist slaps tomb guard. His response leaves the world speechless." And while the world debated and argued, the guard himself said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. The plaza had returned to a tense silence, but the peace was different now. It wasn't calm, it was heavy. The sound of Karen's slap still echoed in everyone's mind. As officers escorted her away, the murmurs of the crowd swelled into quiet conversations. Some were angry, some stunned, and others heartbroken that someone could disrespect a place so sacred. An elderly veteran standing near the edge wiped his eyes. His trembling voice broke through the hush. "That soldier? He's guarding every man and woman who never came home." She had no idea what she just did. A woman beside him nodded, holding her phone tight. "I recorded it," she whispered. "People need to see this." Within minutes, clips of the incident began flooding social media. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all buzzing with disbelief. The video spread like wildfire. Captions read, "Karen slaps tomb guard. Unbelievable disrespect at Arlington." His reaction? Pure discipline. Every post carried the same message, outrage mixed with admiration for the guard's restraint. The video showed him standing tall, unflinching, and calm even after being struck. That image, that single frame of honor under fire, captured the internet's attention. Meanwhile, back at the plaza, the officers led Karen to a small security office near the entrance. Her face was pale, her voice shaky. The reality of her actions was sinking in. "I didn't mean to, he ignored me," she stammered. One of the officers looked at her sternly. "Ma'am, he's a member of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment. His duty is to maintain the highest respect for the fallen. He doesn't respond to anyone. That's the rule." Karen's son sat in a chair beside her, tears in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "you hit a soldier." Those words hung in the air like a verdict. Outside, news reporters were already arriving. Crowds gathered at the gates whispering about the incident at the tomb. A few even brought flowers, placing them near the site as a show of respect. Inside the plaza, the guard continued his shift as if nothing had happened. Step by step, turn, step by step again. His face calm, unbroken. The slap hadn't touched his spirit. Later that afternoon, a senior officer arrived to check on him. "You handled that perfectly," he said quietly. The guard gave a simple nod, never breaking formation. That's what made him, and every soldier like him, extraordinary. Their strength came not from aggression, but from control. By evening, the story had reached international news outlets. Comment sections overflowed with messages. That guard's discipline deserves a medal. The world needs more people like him. Imagine the restraint it takes to stay silent after that. Karen's name was soon trending worldwide, and not in the way she ever imagined. The internet called her the woman who slapped a hero. Memes spread, interviews aired, and commentators debated her punishment. Meanwhile, the tomb guard's image became a symbol of respect, discipline, and silent strength. The next morning, millions had seen the video. Schools showed it in assemblies. Veterans reposted it with pride. Even international audiences, from Europe to Asia, praised the soldier's composure. Karen's apology came late that night, released through trembling words on a local news interview. "I was wrong. I let my anger get the best of me. I didn't understand what this place stood for. Now I do." But for most people, her regret couldn't erase what the world had seen. The guard, however, never commented. He didn't need to. His silence had already said more than words ever could. By the next morning, the video had become impossible to ignore. Every major news network replayed the clip, the slap, the silence, and the soldier's unshakable composure. Anchors spoke with disbelief. Veterans called in to share their outrage, and citizens everywhere demanded accountability. The tomb of the unknown soldier, normally a quiet, sacred place, and had become the center of a national conversation. People weren't just angry at what Karen did. They were heartbroken. To them, the tomb wasn't just marble and ceremony, it was memory. It was every soldier who never came home, every mother who never got closure, every folded flag handed to a grieving family, and she had violated that. Karen woke up to hundreds of missed calls, thousands of angry messages, and reporters camped outside her home. Her name and face were everywhere, screenshots, memes, headlines. "Karen slaps tomb guard" was now one of the most searched phrases on the internet. She tried to go out, but people stared. Some whispered, others shouted insults. Her employer called that afternoon. They were reassessing her position. Her son didn't want to go to school. He stayed in his room, avoiding the online comments that tore his family apart. Karen's world, once loud and proud, had fallen into silence. The same silence she'd mocked at the tomb. Meanwhile, at Arlington, the guard who endured her slap continued his duty as if nothing had happened. His uniform pressed, his boots polished, his expression steady. To him, the mission hadn't changed. He wasn't there for fame. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there for them, the unknowns. That afternoon, his commanding officer approached him again. "You've made the country proud," the officer said quietly. The video went everywhere. The guard gave a brief nod. "Just doing my duty, sir." Those 5 words summed up everything. Across social media, millions praised his composure. Veterans organizations called him a symbol of true military discipline. Students wrote essays about his restraint. Even families who had lost loved ones at war shared emotional tributes, thanking him for standing tall. Television hosts replayed the moment frame by frame, emphasizing his calm, controlled reaction. "This is what honor looks like," one commentator said. He didn't react with violence, he reacted with integrity. But while the world celebrated him, Karen faced a legal reckoning. The following week, she appeared in court wearing a gray suit, hands trembling. Her lawyer spoke softly, arguing that she'd acted out of ignorance, not hatred. But the judge wasn't impressed. "Ignorance," he said firmly, "does not excuse disrespect. Especially not here." Karen was fined heavily for assaulting a federal service member and banned from all national monuments for 5 years. She also had to complete community service, specifically volunteering at a veterans hospital. When the sentence was read, she nodded through tears. Her arrogance had vanished. What remained was shame, and perhaps a small spark of understanding. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her again. One asked, "Do you have anything to say to the soldier?" Karen looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. He deserved my respect, not my anger." The apology aired nationwide, but many viewers felt it came too late. Still, some veterans forgave her, saying the punishment would teach her what lectures couldn't. Meanwhile, at the tomb, tourists returned, more respectful than ever. Parents reminded their children to stay quiet. Veterans stood with hands over their hearts, some saluting with tears in their eyes, and every few minutes someone would whisper, "That's where it happened." The incident had changed the atmosphere forever. People no longer saw the guard as just a ceremonial figure. They saw him as the embodiment of discipline, patience, and the soul of the fallen. A month later, the guard was invited to speak at a private veterans dinner. He rarely gave interviews, but that night he said a few words that would echo for years. "The tomb isn't just a monument," he said. "It's a promise that we will never forget those who gave everything. My job is to keep that promise alive no matter what happens." The audience gave him a standing ovation. Some wept. Even Karen, sitting at home watching on TV, felt the weight of his words. She finally understood what she had disrespected. Not a man, not a ceremony, but a symbol of sacrifice itself. In the weeks that followed, she began her community service. The first day was awkward. She didn't know what to say to the veterans she met. But as she listened to their stories, soldiers who'd lost limbs, who'd buried friends, who carried invisible wounds, something inside her changed. One afternoon, a veteran in a wheelchair looked up at her and smiled gently. "You're the lady from the news, right?" he said. Karen froze. "Yes," she whispered. I'm sorry for everything," the man nodded. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what you learn from them." Those words stayed with her long after she left the hospital. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. Quietly this time, humbly. She stopped chasing attention and started volunteering more often. She visited memorials, not for pictures, but to stand in silence. And one day, months later, she returned to Arlington. Not as a tourist, not as a loud voice, but as a humbled citizen. She stood far behind the rope, hands clasped, tears in her eyes as the tomb guard marched before her. He didn't look her way. He didn't need to, but she whispered under her breath, "Thank you." The echo of his boots on marble answered softly. Steady. Disciplined, eternal for the first time, Karen understood what that sound truly meant. It wasn't just a march. It was a heartbeat. The heartbeat of a nation that honors its fallen, no matter who's watching. Weeks had passed since that fateful day at Arlington. The plaza had long returned to its quiet rhythm, the slow, deliberate steps of the tomb guard echoing through the marble corridor of time. But the world hadn't forgotten. The video was still being shared, analyzed, and honored. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It had become a symbol. A reminder of how discipline, respect, and silence could defeat ignorance louder than any argument ever could. Karen, now deep into her community service, woke early every morning to volunteer at the Veterans Hospital. She pushed wheelchairs, served meals, and listened. Really listened. Every story she heard peeled away another layer of her old arrogance. A young veteran told her how he'd lost his best friend in combat and still visited the memorial every year. Another said the tomb meant more to him than his medals. It represented every brother and sister who never made it home. Karen would often find herself crying quietly in the hallway afterward. She no longer saw herself as a victim of cancel culture. She knew this was a second chance, and to understand, to grow, and to atone. One afternoon, the hospital's TV played a special news feature, the silent strength, the tomb guard who inspired millions. Karen stopped mid-step and turned toward the screen. There he was, the same guard she had slapped, now standing with other soldiers during a wreath-laying ceremony. His face calm, his movements perfect, his purpose unwavering. The reporter's voice narrated softly. He asked not to be named in this story. He says the real heroes are the ones he stands for, the ones who can't speak anymore. Karen sat down, tears running down her cheeks. "He still doesn't even want attention," she whispered. "He just serves." That humility struck her harder than any punishment ever could. The story continued. Veterans, families, and even international audiences sending letters of gratitude. Schools in different countries began teaching the event as an example of restraint and honor. One letter read, "To the Tomb Guard, thank you for reminding the world that dignity isn't weakness. It's power." Another from a young boy said, "I want to be like you when I grow up, strong but kind." The impact reached far beyond the United States. Across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, military academies replayed the footage to teach their cadets about emotional control and service under pressure. The Guard had unknowingly become a global example of character. Meanwhile, Karen's transformation was quietly unfolding. She began speaking to students and youth groups about what she'd done, not to excuse herself, but to warn them about the cost of ignorance. "I thought respect was optional," she told one classroom. "It's not. Respect is the foundation of everything, for others, for your country, for yourself." Her words, raw and regretful, carried a strange power. The same woman the world had hated was now being heard, not as a villain but as a cautionary voice. Her journey didn't erase her mistake, but it gave that mistake meaning. Back at Arlington, the Tomb Guard story continued to inspire. A news crew asked his commanding officer for a comment. He said he didn't react because he represents more than himself. When you wear that uniform, you stand for every soul who can't stand anymore. That's what keeps him steady. That single quote went viral too. It became the caption on countless tribute videos and memorial posts. Then came the moment that no one expected. One crisp morning, months after the incident, Karen returned quietly to Arlington. Not with cameras, not with reporters, just her, a small bouquet of white roses and a heavy heart. She stood far behind the crowd, watching in silence. The guard on duty wasn't the same one she had struck, but the ceremony was identical. Every movement sharp, every step sacred. She waited until the shift ended. Then as the crowd began to thin, she placed the roses near the steps. A small note attached read, "To the soldier I disrespected, your silence taught me more than words ever could. I understand now. Thank you." She turned to leave without saying a word. Nearby, a park ranger who had recognized her gave a subtle nod. No judgment, just quiet acknowledgement. She nodded back and walked away, tears streaming freely. That image, Karen leaving the roses behind, would later be captured by a visitor's camera. When shared online, it reignited the conversation, but this time the tone had changed. People saw not a scandal, but redemption. Not shame, but growth. The comments read, "This is what accountability looks like. We all mess up. Owning it, that's what matters." She finally understood. Across the country, news anchors revisited the story, now calling it a lesson in honor. Veterans applauded her humility. Schools used the story in ethics discussions, and the Tomb Guard, still silent, still serving, continued his eternal march, untouched by fame or opinion. That's the thing about true honor. It doesn't change with the headlines. It endures. The slap had been a moment of ignorance. The silence that followed became a moment of enlightenment. And together, they told a story the world would never forget. Months had passed, but the memory of that day at Arlington still lingered. Not as a scandal anymore, but as a symbol of transformation. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood as it always had, silent, sacred, unchanging. Yet for millions who had seen that viral video, it now carried a deeper meaning. Every day, visitors arrived with flowers, flags, and gratitude. Parents reminded their children to stay quiet. Veterans saluted with tears in their eyes. And somewhere deep within the crowd, Karen often stood, no longer loud, no longer angry, just present, silent and humbled. She didn't come for attention. She didn't speak to reporters. She came to remember the moment she lost control, and the man who never did. The guard she had slapped continued to serve. His name remained undisclosed, just as he wished. He didn't chase interviews, fame, or sympathy. He returned to his post day after day in the same crisp uniform, performing the same sacred duty, because that's what true honor looks like, consistent, unseen, and unwavering. One day, a ceremony was held at Arlington to honor the Guard's service. Veterans, officials, and families of the fallen gathered. The same Guard was there, standing at attention, stoic as ever. As the event began, the Master of Ceremonies spoke into the microphone. There are moments that remind us why respect matters, not because of rules, but because of what it represents. Today, we honor the discipline that stands watch over sacrifice. The crowd applauded softly. Cameras flashed. Among them, unseen, stood Karen, in the very back row. She clutched a folded American flag to her chest, given to her by one of the veterans she'd worked with at the hospital. "You've learned what that flag really means," he had told her. Tears welled in her eyes as she listened to the ceremony. The Guard marched past, unsteady, measured, perfect. And though he never looked her way, Karen bowed her head. For her, it wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about understanding, truly understanding, the cost of peace, the price of freedom, and the power of respect. When the ceremony ended, the crowd dispersed slowly. Families took pictures, veterans shook hands, and the Guards resumed their posts. Karen stayed behind for a moment longer, staring at the marble stone before her. The engraving read, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." She whispered, "I understand now." The wind carried her words across the plaza, soft, almost invisible, but heavy with meaning. A few weeks later, the documentary The Guard Who Never Flinched aired worldwide. It told the story from every angle, the discipline, the duty, and the lesson learned. It didn't shame Karen. It didn't glorify the slap. Instead, it focused on what came after: growth, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of silence. The final line of the documentary said, "In a world that shouts, sometimes the loudest power is found in silence." That quote spread like wildfire. People printed it on shirts, posters, and murals. Schools discussed it. Even leaders referenced it in speeches about patience and dignity. The story had transcended a single moment. It had become a message. Karen continued volunteering long after her sentence ended. She spent her weekends speaking at memorials, helping veterans' families, and quietly funding scholarships for military kids. She never spoke about the slap again, because she didn't need to. Her actions had become her apology. As for the Guard, his watch never ended. Every day he walked those 21 steps, the same steps soldiers had walked since 1948, guarding not a tomb, but a legacy. Tourists still whispered his story. Parents still told their children about the soldier who stood tall even when struck. And somewhere in the distance, the rhythm of his boots echoed through history. One step for respect, one for sacrifice, and one for every lesson the world needed to remember. Years had passed since that unforgettable day at the tomb of the unknown soldier, but the echo of it still lived on. Not as a scandal, not as a meme, but as a story of awakening. Every anniversary of the incident, people still shared the clip online, not to shame, but to remember. It had become a digital monument in itself, a reminder that respect once forgotten can always be rediscovered. The tomb still stood in perfect silence. Guards still changed every hour, precise, unwavering, untouchable. Rain or shine, day or night, they kept their vow, just as they had for decades. One morning, under a sky washed in pale gold, the same Guard who'd once been slapped prepared for duty again. The world had changed. New generations had come to visit. But for him, nothing had changed. His boots were polished, his uniform spotless, his purpose steady. He wasn't guarding a grave anymore. He was guarding the meaning of honor. As he marched those 21 steps, a small crowd gathered. Among them stood teachers, veterans, children holding flags, and a middle-aged woman wearing a simple white shirt. Her name was Karen, but this wasn't the same Karen the world had once mocked. This was someone different, quieter, calmer, and carrying something invisible yet heavy: redemption. She didn't try to approach the Guard. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed a single white rose on the marble steps, whispered a prayer, and stepped back. A young boy standing nearby tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, who's she?" The father smiled softly. "Someone who learned what respect means." After the ceremony, a local news reporter noticed Karen and gently approached her. "Ma'am, are you the same woman from the viral Tomb Guard video years ago?" Karen nodded slightly. "Yes," she said, "and I'll never stop learning from it." Her voice wasn't defensive and it was steady. The reporter hesitated, then asked, "What did that moment teach you?" Karen looked toward the guard still pacing with perfect rhythm and replied, "It taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's control." That man didn't just protect a tomb, he protected his soul. I've spent every day since trying to find that same peace. The clip aired on the evening news. It wasn't sensationalized this time, no clickbait, no hate. Just a woman reflecting on her past and how one moment of pride had become her lifelong teacher. The public reaction was entirely different now. Comments flooded in, saying, "That's growth. Everyone deserves a second chance. The world needs more guards like him, and more honesty like hers." Even the U.S. Army's official account reshared the video, captioned simply, "Respect endures." Weeks later, something remarkable happened. Karen received an invitation from the Arlington Honor Society, a private event for families of fallen soldiers, veterans, and select civilians who had supported memorial preservation. She hesitated, unsure if she deserved to be there. But attached to the letter was a handwritten note. Redemption isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about proving you've learned from it. A friend at the tomb. The handwriting was clean, disciplined, and unmistakable. She smiled through tears. At the event, Karen sat quietly among the guests. When her turn came to speak, she stepped to the microphone and said only this: "Years ago, I disrespected a man who never lost his composure. That moment changed my life. I came here not as a guest of honor, but as a student of humility. The guard I wronged showed the world that strength doesn't need to shout. It just stands." The room went silent. Then, a soft wave of applause filled the hall. Afterward, as the crowd mingled, a tall figure approached her. Crisp uniform, calm eyes. It was him, the guard. He offered his hand. "You've come far," he said quietly. Karen shook his hand, her eyes wet. "Thank you for not reacting that day. You taught me more than anyone ever has." He gave a small nod. "Then it was worth it." And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the quiet hum of the evening. Months later, Karen started a small nonprofit called Silent Honor, a program that took at-risk youth and helped them learn discipline, respect, and service through volunteering at veterans' memorials. The program grew faster than anyone expected. What started as one woman's way of giving back turned into a national movement. Schools adopted it. Communities embraced it. And every student who joined learned the same rule that changed Karen's life. Respect is not demanded, it's demonstrated. Years from now, when people visit Arlington, they still tell two stories, one of the tomb, and one of the woman who once forgot its meaning but found it again through humility. Children point at the guards and whisper, "They never move even if someone yells or pushes them." Parents nod, replying, "Because they're not just guarding a tomb, they're guarding what's right." And somewhere among the crowd, maybe unseen, Karen's spirit lingers. Not as the woman who slapped, but as the woman who listened,